So, what is anarchist studies? Well, I think for me, there's two sides to anarchist studies. So on the one hand, there's the idea of taking anarchism as an objective study, so something that you would examine like any other objective scientific inquiry. So that could be historical research you'd be doing, it could be contemporary study of contemporary anarchist practices, or like I said, historical practices. But the idea would be very much that, okay, you've got anarchism as something that exists in the world, processes, practices, histories, different works of different scholars, that kind of thing. And these would be things that you would examine as an academic. On the other hand, there's a second way of looking at anarchist studies, and this is the way that I think I come to the field definitely, is anarchist studies as a part of anarchist practice and a part of anarchist social movements. And so, I mean, my background was first as an activist, and then, I wanted to make the research that I was doing at my undergraduate level, at a master's, and now at PhD level that I'm at, wanting to make that research related in some sense to the politics that I was involved in. Not just in terms of some kind of political belief, but in terms of the activism that I was actively participating in, and still am. So that's the way that I come to anarchist studies, is as an activist and seeing it as related to anarchist practice. And I think again there's two ways you can look at that. So on the one hand you can see, well, okay, so we're saying that anarchist studies has to be something which is related to anarchist practice in some sense, anarchist social movements. And you can look at that quite instrumentally. So you could kind of say, okay, well, we're going to step back from actual engagement with the social movement, examine what's happening, examine the potentials, the pitfalls, the drawbacks, things like that, look at the processes that are taking place, look at how we can improve them, and then come back in and try and, disseminate that information, disseminate that as a product of the research. And that's one way of doing it. It's still engaged with the movement, but the way that I'm more interested in, that I come, or the way that I come to it from, is by seeing anarchist studies as a part of the movement. So not as something which you step out, do the research, come back in and say, well, this is how we should be doing it, but seeing anarchist studies as an actual essential part of anarchist politics. And in that sense, it's something prefigurative. So it's not something completely detached from the politics, it's a part of the politics. And in that sense, what it means for me is that there's certain ways of doing anarchist studies. As coming to anarchist studies as an anarchist, doing this research as an anarchist, or as a radical leftist at least, there's certain ways you should do that research and ways you shouldn't do it. And for me, I think it's about, like I said, being prefigurative and trying to embody the certain, the values and principles of anarchist politics in the research. So not just the topics that I do research on, but also the ways in which I do that research. So for example, one way of looking at it would be saying, okay, some of the research I'm doing is empirical. It involves working with what would be traditionally considered research subjects, and in traditional social sciences, these are sources of information. So research subjects are considered sources of information. Nothing more than that usually, or maybe that's unfair, but the kind of straw man that's presented of traditional social science is that of seeing interviewees, for example, as people you just get information from. The way I come to it, and the way actually a lot of researchers I know come to it, but for me it's influenced by anarchist politics, is seeing the research as a kind of collaboration, a process of participation. So I would see the people I've done the research with, not as people I've done research on, but as, like I said, people I've done research with, who have participated in this research with me. And so I would see the whole process of the research I'm doing as something which is about the movement learning about itself, and about, yes, trying to improve things, but not in the sense of me offering prescriptions, but more in the sense of, okay, we, myself, and the people I've done the research with, the participants, can get together, talk about this in different ways, create some outputs from it, and through that try and look at the processes that are happening within the movement and within certain groups, and see how they can be improved, or perhaps see what's going well with them, and that kind of thing. So again, so it's prefigurative in more than one sense. It's prefigurative in the sense of you have to kind of embody certain core principles of anarchism. So being democratic, being open, not trying to dominate people, not trying to exclude people, trying to care for people. That's an important concept, I think, which has been picked up by other anarchist scholars, the idea of care in doing research. But it's also prefigurative in the sense of the whole process of anarchist research is to kind of question what's going on within anarchist movements, and try and see where they're going, and try and see how things could be different, or just trying to understand them for the sake of being aware of what we're doing, and aware of where we can go wrong and what we need to be doing to get to where we want to go, and also discussing, well, where is it we want to go? What is this end, this kind of goal of anarchist politics, both in the long-term sense, but also in the very short-term sense. What kind of things do we want to actually be doing with our activism? So I would say anarchist research is really bound up in that, really connected to that idea of prefigurative anarchist politics. So I think for me that's essentially what anarchist studies is, or what it should be. And I think, this may sound a bit crass, but I think that's why I think something like anarchist developments in cultural studies is so good, because it is, or at least it can be seen as a kind of anarchist form of presenting the research that we're doing. It's open access, anyone can go online and read these articles. There's other anarchist institutions, or institutions of anarchist studies, anarchist research, which aren't like that. So some of these articles, some of the outputs of research on anarchist movements by anarchists, is it kind of sits behind paywalls, and the publishers who've been involved in some of that, they've come under a lot of criticism recently in relation to intellectual property. And I think that's something which does stand at odds with anarchist politics. And I don't want to denigrate the work of the people in these institutions, because they're doing fantastic work. It's really, really interesting research. But I think something like anarchist developments in cultural studies is good, because it's moving towards a kind of more anarchist way of doing research, and I think that's essential. So it's not that the kind of what other people are doing in some other journals is necessarily bad. I don't think that, but I think it would be good to kind of see, well, how can anarchist research be more open? How can it be more in tune with anarchist politics? So I think for me that's essential.